Right. Hello all. I'm Amaya Prabhu, and I'm a prospective PhD student who is going to start my PhD in continuous learning in about like 15 days now. So this is our first work uh, where we try to see uh, what uh, what are the sort of quirks and assumptions in continual learning literature and propose a very simple method which leads to some interesting insights on like the way forward. This was joint work with Dr. Dokania and Professor Tal. So before I begin to discuss the quirks and like the progress in continual learning, I will quickly discuss what I think continual learning is, why we need it, and what makes it so difficult. But it's probably most of you are here more informed about continual learning than me since I'm just starting out. At any point, if you just want to raise any questions, just ask away. I'll just pause and we can discuss.
Cool. But
I'll
maybe
also
maybe
pause.
you want to share your slides. Do you have it already?
Oh, can you not see it?
No, no.
Oops.
No problem.
Just 1 minute. Is it visible now?
Yes, thanks.
Yes. Sure. This is joint work with Professor Dokania and uh, Dr. Dokania and Professor Tar. But yeah, so we'll start. So first, what is continual learning? To motivate that, like let's just take like a standard supervised learning setup. You have like a data set with n samples given. Your task is to develop a classifier to predict the labels from the input. And deep learning does this very well. Everything's nice. But what if you get another data set continuing after the first one? And the task is that, okay, now you have to do well on the combined data set. Then the standard supervised learning solution would be to create a concatenated data set and then learn the supervised model over this concatenated data set. Continual learning is basically this process over multiple time steps. So you imagine you have a stream of data sets coming, which is from I to K. You have to, uh, if you under this supervised learning paradigm, you have to concatenate these data sets at every time step and then learn a network over them. This process would repeat every time a new data set comes and you want to learn. This is the redundancy that we seek to eliminate in continual learning. That is, given a stream of data, which is D1, D2, D3, we want to learn only over the latest set of samples, leveraging the past knowledge in some form and optimize using that over the current data to sort of consolidate all the existing things efficiently. And this repeats at every data step till time t. So we only optimize over the last time step, and the goal is to develop mechanisms to add, consolidate, and query some knowledge over time. Okay, this was like just a short intro. And what we see in a typical continual learning paper is that they will like take uh, like either they will few papers will choose a formulation, which is like say they will take an iCal setup or something, and they'll propose a new cool model or like develop a benchmark over existing models. Like they will test what okay, what's the effect of class ordering, what's the effect of if we do this tweak, then what happens, etc. This is the typical, like a typical caricature of a continual learning paper. And what they expect is that, okay, this model or benchmarking will give us insights on how to consolidate knowledge in the formulation. So now this leads to the very natural question that, okay, if you want to take a formulation, like what's the best formulation to work on or uh, things like that. What we what the first point I wanted to sorry, we're just first putting out, okay, what do we propose in this paper? The first thing we try to do is the first claim is we need to develop a method which will work on all formulations and work very scalably with the quirks and assumptions encoded in the popular formulations. So what we will do for that is we will discuss a general continual learning formulation and then see how different formulations are like a special cases of it. And if we develop a approach for the general formulation which works without any assumptions, we expect it to reasonably work over these existing formulations. That's the way which we will tackle, and we'll go from like working on one formulation or like specializing on one formulation to working across a broad range of formulations. That's the first thing which we will have. And then the second thing, oops, yeah, then the second thing is the approach. So uh, generally, continual learning has been like very benchmark driven. That people will keep on proposing new models, and the performance is evaluated by beating existing methods or like showing some nice trick or like some nice insight into existing methods. But what do we mean by what works? We need baselines, or sometimes like called sanity checks. One sanity check is that an approach should work better than random. Like you should get better than 10% performance on MNIST, for example. But that's too easy. Like so, we here seek to propose a baseline, or which is better read as a sanity check called GDAM. What do I mean by a sanity check? the the claim is that if the approach works worse than GDAM, then we can in some sense say it doesn't work. Now this is being provocative, but we'll discuss in later. Why do I mean it doesn't? Oops. Oh, why do I mean it doesn't work? And the caveat being like this is considering the memory case. Like we don't uh, we need memory for this. That's the assumption we work in currently. Then the surprising claim, which is the question in progress, comes is nearly all existing CL approaches perform worse than GDAM. But this is not to question that the approach is bad. We don't know the source yet. Like the source might be like bad benchmarking, just a bad evaluation, maybe like improving evaluation might help. So, but this leads us to question, okay, what's really happening? This will be what our paper will focus on. These are the two things that we'll discuss. So like questions up till here, like, is there any? Cool. I'll just first start with formulations. So to discuss formulations, first we'll discuss, okay, what do we want to do and what are the existing formulations doing? So, and while we contrast this, we'll get an idea of, okay, where the shift, where the difference lies in some sense. So the motivation of continual learning comes from like how humans perceive the world. And the claim is that supervised learning is ill adapted to acquire and consolidate new information arriving online. Say like a cat and dog classifier will happily classify everything it sees as a cat or a dog. Even this, not even knowing what it doesn't know, which is essential for continual learning or developing general image classifiers. When a classifier doesn't, when a classifier knows what it doesn't know, it can query more data actively and then upgrade their knowledge in using the old and the new data, leading to better representations. This is sort of the aim of continual learning. And this is like one time step. This is like one iteration of learning, and this we hope will like occur over multiple time steps, and this leads us to like nice, good representations and sort of like a way of consolidating knowledge. This is uh, what we seek to achieve. So based on it, here what a general formulation of continual a more general formulation of continual learning would sort of look like. We have a stream of data sets, or like for now, let's call it data. Let's just assume that we have a stream of data coming with samples and the colors representing the label of the sample. The data stream can provide any sample with any label, new or old, at any instant in time. So you can have purple, like which is class 1, class 2, class 3, and then class 1 comes again, and there is no constraint on any order. And suppose at this time I decide to test that okay, now I want to benchmark how good my learner is. At test time as well, you can have existing. Suppose I take my model and I try to test this. The model can say that oh, I know that this belongs to the orange class, this belongs to the green class, but it can incur samples like this where it says that hey, I have never seen a cyan class. Like it just says I don't know what this is. This looks like something new, or like this looks like something new. I have never seen a sample like this, which might correspond to a new class, which then will lead to consolidation of knowledge on which we'll train, etc. But this formulation is extremely difficult. This is the general open set formulation, and hence past papers have made significant relaxations to this. So first is just removing the constraint that okay, new classes will come at test time, because this unknown classes coming at test time is just too hard. So even if you relax it, you will have basically a data stream where any sample can come at any time, and you have to learn and you have to test over the same classes. But even this on this model, people have put a lot of constraints. So like the first constraint people have put is disjoint set. What it means is all data streams, the data stream is divided into very well segregated tasks, which will contain sharp demarcations and a subset of labels. This assumption reduces the complexity of the problem drastically, creating a two-stage hierarchy where the first stage is the task and the second stage is the classes within the task. And these classes are disjoint, you'll never see them again. And this is the first restriction which is put to make the problem learnable. So the so the properties that this has over the general formulation, the constraints which this formulation imposes over the general formulation is that we will have only seen labels, and instead of the old and new any sample coming at any time, only new classes come with sharp demarcations. And since it's a stream, we cannot revisit the stream samples again. So this is the first constraint people have put, general approaches have put. The second people have gone beyond this first constraint and imposed uh, uh, more constraints. So like one popular constraint beyond the disjoint set assumption is that they will drastically slash the time steps needed for training. So like if this has learning over say like 5,000 time steps in a data set, they will reduce it to like 10 time steps, which is over 10 tasks. This leads to a clean partition of of uh, clusters into tasks, and it will reduce all the samples in that time step to one time step. In this formulation, you have no restrictions on iterating over the samples of the same task. You can train as much as you want. Hence, we are calling this in certain sense an offline setup. Then the literature has like a third major branch where they give the Oracle task ID, which leads to like independent streams of data coming. This is called as task incremental setup or like a multitask setup. The extra constraint imposed here is that new streams can come, that is, new tasks can arrive, but given a task, there will be no new classes. So this is the general breakdown of like the formula of the constraints people have imposed on continual learning, and this and the sort of reduction in complexity they achieved by this. So now what people do is they will take one of these three settings and they will benchmark on this approximation, and they will develop an approach which is sometimes and often tailored to this to one of these approximations of like the because of the implicit assumptions made in the model. For example, if you have like a multitask setup where you have multi heads and you learn in your training over the multi heads, then you are implicitly assuming that you have a disjoint set of tasks, that you will never have this sort of a free setup which is already constraining, and you will have like task streams. If you uh, if you assume like all tasks sort of come in one time step, uh, then the implicit assumption in the paper is made upon the number of time steps you'll train on. So like these approaches will have very few time steps. They will have like 5 time steps they will train on, or 10 time steps. So the learning is constrained to a very small margin of of you know things that you want to continually learn over. So like it's easy to learn over 5 time steps. Like 2 time steps is almost domain adaptation kind of a thing. 10 time steps is not easy. Whereas in an online setup, even an typical MNIST or like a CIFAR, like an MIR paper formulation will have like close to 5,000 time steps over which you need to learn continual, which you'll need to learn continually over. So this is a drastic reduction. And this, so we formed this nice table here, which tells in the left what are the assumptions made, which is this is the class incremental versus task incremental. This is the online versus offline, and this is the disjoint. So this is the non-disjoint versus disjoint setup. This demarcation is made here, and all the papers which mainly test on, so like these two papers will test mainly on this formulation, which we categorize as A. These papers will typically tend to test on an ICAL kind of a setup, which is formulation B. This paper similarly is formulation D, C, E, which has different assumptions. And popularly, people will categorize the method of learning uh, of trying to consolidate knowledge. So like regularization based approaches will consolidate knowledge by having constraints to prevent forgetting. Memory based approaches will have some sort of a stored samples or like a generative model to try to replay samples or use these samples to reduce forgetting. Distillation will have loss functions which will try to prevent a model from forgetting the previous mapping from x to y. Or like a parameter isolation based method will have entirely like, they will generate new networks for new tasks, or they will expand a network given new data, or like they will try to compress knowledge in a pruned network and then try to learn maps by gating, etc. And often literature has used a hybrid of these methods. Like here, methods typically use a combination of these methods, unlike and not just a single way of doing it to tackle continual learning. This are the sort of like the division of formulations, the assumptions they make, and the approaches that paper take. So, for example, if you take the example of RBOK, it tries to mitigate forgetting using regularization with the help of memory of previous tasks. It does this in a task incremental setup, which means that its CIFAR dataset or its MNIST dataset will only have 10 tasks or 10 iterations across time. And it only has to prevent catastrophic forgetting over 10 iterations. So this is the summary of the first part of the paper, where we we sort of say that, okay, we observe that papers generally test only on one specific formulation, and this will lead to algorithms failing to generalize. And also, with these assumptions, we need to ask how practical are these assumptions of sharp transitions, of of no restrictions on iterating over same task samples, or having new streams but having no classes per stream. Like, how useful are these restrictions to practical scenarios? And these approaches are often very sensitive to hyperparameters, which leads to the problem that continual learning approaches lead are at the very edge. Like, they are deployed and they are continuously learning at that space. There, the issue is that you can't really tweak a plethora of hyperparameters and it just gets and that sort of needs to have like a sort of speed up there. And the third part is that often approaches are very computationally intensive. So like, this leads to the problem that, okay, why do you not train a supervised model directly instead? So to tackle this, we propose a very simple method which works across all these formulations while putting minimal restrictions. So our assumptions made are only on this form. We assume this formulation. So we make no assumptions. Our method makes no assumptions of having a disjoint subset. It'll not train online, and it'll not train offline in any way. It will never assume a task ID while training, but we will compare it with all these approaches, which use task ID while training, which train online and have no restrictions over iterating over task samples, and methods which leverage the fact that there are sharp transitions. But for now, are there any questions over like the classification of a literature? Why use the general formulation over, you know, any questions up till here? So, what does GDOM do? So our claim is, what you do, how do you train this sanity check? Is that given a data stream, you just keep sampling the data into a memory. So how do you do it? You sample greedily samples as they come, while ensuring that equal number of samples are stored from each class. This is possible very easily in an online setup with no constraints. When asked to test that, okay, now we want to deploy this model, say at this time instant you want to deploy this model, we take this memory and we train a network from scratch on this memory. Then for inference, we take this method, this network, and use it on any holdout set or any testing set which comes for deployment, and we just do a simple forward pass. Now, to adapt, to evaluate on the task incremental setup, since our training has no assumption of tasks, we incorporate the tasks here by multiplying the softmax predictions with a mask. so that we can get a subset of the predictions and then take the maximum over it, to incorporate the notion of, okay, predicting only over this task of class, the classes in this particular task. So it's totally dumb. Why? Because this, if you observe the learner, it has no access over any of the online samples. It has no access over the previous memory time steps, and still it has to learn and perform competitively over approaches which do so. I'll this is probably more clear here. So like, if you take a typical uh, replay based setup which also leverages memory along with say regularization or distillation or network expansion kind of approaches. So they use memory and use these online samples and train very complicated combinations of this to train a network over across time steps. And if you just use the memory at time t and you train the network from scratch, you're missing a lot of the previous information. You have no way to capture the temporality. There is no way to prevent any catastrophic forgetting because you basically have no information about the previous samples. You don't have access to the previous samples. You don't have access to the previous memory. Hence, we call this a sanity check because this doesn't prevent catastrophic forgetting at all. This has no notion of a catastrophic forgetting even. This just says that, okay, what performance P can you get while training with just the samples in the memory? And if existing approaches do better, they the P existing has to be better than P, because P is just the performance you can achieve leveraging information in the current memory. So if you want to consolidate information or remember information about the previous time steps, you have to do better than just with the previous memory. So you have to probably use some information stored in the network previously, or like the memory previously, or like leverage the online samples and do better. This is this has to absolutely be true, because otherwise we have no notion of preventing catastrophic forgetting, because this doesn't prevent anything. This is just using the information in the current time step. This, since it's the main claim of the paper, like why is this a sanity check? Is this sort of clear?
Yeah,
Can
it's
anyone hear
clear.
me? Yeah, okay.
Can I ask a question
Okay.
about it, Amelia?
Yes.
Hello,
Yes.
cool. Yeah. So yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. I've read the paper, so I know the conclusions. I like the conclusions, but I think that in the online setting, where we're assuming that you could make predictions online, so at each time step you should be able to make predictions and maybe give it real time to the user. Maybe in that case, this benchmark is not something we should have to beat, right? Because this cannot really make online predictions, if I understand correctly.
So to come to that question, like I have like a slide on that particular question
Cool.
Further, but
Cool.
Just to motivate why this is a sanity check. Like, we don't claim this is the way continual learning approaches should be. Of course, this is just super dumb. We should not train from scratch over the memory.
Mm-hmm.
But like, why does it take time? Because it's a sanity check. This is not really like a way you should do online continual learning. We should do online continual learning something like this. But to test, we need to just check that, okay, is the performance of models greater than the performance you can achieve only by training on the memory?
Yep. Yeah, I understand this, but maybe this is this bar is too high for online continual learning methods to beat, because it has a lot of more compute to do its predictions yeah, it has a lot more compute to do a prediction at any time step, right? Because at every time step, it's retraining a whole new neural net. So maybe it's an unfair benchmark in the online continual learning setting. I don't know.
So like it does. I mean, when we train from scratch, it's to isolate the effect. Like when we train from scratch, we can. It's like very easy to. It's like very like clear to make the claim that we have no influence whatsoever of the past samples or the past memory or the past network. But of course, this can be optimized pretty easily. Like instead of training from scratch, you can use like the model at the previous time step and fine tune it or something. This can be sped up and stuff. But like the sort of the direction, the intuition is not that way. Like for example, in online setups, people just assume that you should not leverage past past data points in the stream. That's all the assumption they make. Really, online methods don't assume that you need to be real time or you need to have outputs fast. Which I mean, like MIR paper does a very fast inference, which is good. But there are also like a lot of papers like GEM, which will solve like expensive quadratic programs at every time step. So while they are still online in the sense that they don't reuse past samples, but the there is no real constraint in existing setups over time. Like no setup says that okay, you only have say 2 minutes per time step to infer your model on, and hence we don't impose any such constraints either. Like so, what we will do is we will take the same setup assumptions as every paper makes, like the same model, the same memory, the same task assumptions and stuff like that. But we don't impose anything extra.
Can I also ask
Yeah.
one more question on this?
Yes.
But here we still assume that we are seeing all the classes while training. Like, I mean, what if, I mean, in continual learning, it's possible that you can't store anything in memory, for example, for security reasons or privacy reasons. Then it's not this case, right? Or is it covered?
Yes. That will not be this case. So privacy,
Okay.
tackling privacy is an additional constraint where we say that okay, you can't use memory really.
Okay.
But that's a more stricter constraint than the current setup. What we sort of are trying to motivate is that this particular easier task, that okay, you are given memory as well, you're given no restrictions on that. If this itself is not really up to mark, then like what about putting more constraints? Like sure, you can add like the privacy constraint, you can add a few short constraint over this, making this harder. But I'm like the sort of the pitch is that okay, this easier case has problems,
Okay.
let alone the harder cases. I mean, uh, but that is not to say that the privacy constraint is not important. It's very crucial because a large portion of application of continual learning has to have that constraint. So those approaches are not really comparable to this benchmark, and we can't use the sanity check there. That is definitely true. But we really don't gear this towards that. Like we gear this towards these new experience replay methods because nowadays everyone's using experience replay, and this is like being the new thing to do. So just
Okay.
like our main focus relies around these, like okay, when we do experience replay, we should also consider this sort of this baseline of okay, what happens if you train only on the last time step memory, and if this gives better performance than these complicated things, then okay, what is really happening here? Because that is something that should not happen at all.
I have a question too. Can I pitch in?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. So
I mean,
about
let this be a discussion because like I mean I'm also very new. Like I also need like inputs over like okay, what can be the flaws of this, how to improve, what's like good benchmark, etc., etc. Like, yeah. So feel free to shoot any questions.
Yeah, so I see. So I skimmed the paper actually. So I read the paper quickly, and it's I liked it. It's a nice paper, but I wanted to ask you. So in online continual learning, for example, to go back to what Massimo was saying, you would have to retrain your network, like your dumb learner, for each image that comes in. So you need a full training for each new batch or image that comes in available, right? And so I see a strong advantage of experience replay over GDump, because in experience replay you can basically go really online and you don't need like to retrain the network every time.
There the thing is, how are these papers evaluated? If you really see the evaluation of these online continual learning methods, they basically evaluate only at the last time step. That way, so it's very easy to evaluate this GDUM. Like, you will not be training for days or something to evaluate this. Like, typically it takes like 5 minutes to get the numbers for this method, because of the fact that the online methods don't really evaluate at each time step. And that's why, like, a lot of parts of this puzzle we don't know. Like, what happens, suppose if you have a new task and you only have seen one example of this and no other example of that task, then how does the performance of online methods vary? We don't know. Like, they do train at every time, but like, unless the evaluation captures all of these things, we will never know what's going on. Currently, by the evaluation, it seems that things are not looking good. But we hope that, like, this leads to questioning the evaluation process. Like, okay, why do only evaluate at the last time step? We should have a more comprehensive online evaluation. Like, there are new papers which are going towards this, like Osaka and Wondering in a online contextual world, which are going towards more online evaluations where they're actually bringing in these constraints. And what we hope our paper pushes other papers is to question these setups. Like, okay, if papers can't beat GDUM, there is something wrong going on. Either it's the evaluation which is bad, or the benchmark of this, like, disjoint setups, or like having offline training, or like having task incremental training is bad. We hope that we definitely don't want to antagonize other papers, but to use this as a probing method to see that, okay, what exactly might be the way to go. Like, definitely, as you say that, okay, an advantage of online methods is that they can be evaluated at each time. So we should develop evaluation protocols which do so, and then see what happens in that setting, and also put constraints that, okay, you can't take more than X amount of time to train, and this is a constraint in the evaluation setting, and that will help us develop better settings and eventually better methods, like, in that sense.
Yeah, okay, thanks. It was just a consideration, like, it was just considering the fact that this is one of the downsides of doing like GDump.
Of course, like, our method is a very dumb sanity check. Like, we definitely don't, like, you should never use GDump for any of your production uses. Like, this is just to check, this is just to ensure that if you get a performance P on GDump, every continual learning approach which sort of claims to work should have a higher performance. Now, we will, on how to have a fairer evaluation, we have that slide later, but just to keep that in mind. So
hi, Amaya.
Yes.
Yeah, so what is the exact network architecture that is used for this dump learner?
So we don't use any specific architecture, because what we want to do is we want to compare over all these setups. So
Sure. So my follow-up question would be like, so when we benchmark the other methods, so did we use the same kind of network architecture backbone for all of them to put it in the same table and then compare against them?
yes, so basically for offline learning, online learning, task incremental. So suppose you have like all these kind of different formulations. For each formulation, what we will do is uh, actually just let me go forward. That is covered here. So we will use the same network and memory as these formulations. So these are papers which have, so we test on 10 very diverse kind of formulations, where these are online class incremental. This is more like offline class incremental. This is more like
Sure.
offline task incremental in a more challenging setting, like CIFAR 100, ImageNet. These are offline task incremental approaches. This is online task incremental. So these are 10 setups. For comparison in each setup, we will use the same model as them. We will use the same memory as them. We'll use the same metric and all the so if they evaluate the accuracy at the end, we will also train GDUM we will sample all the way up till the end. So we will have only one evaluation time step, which is at the end of the dataset. So for the whole dataset, you just create the memory. At the end, you train a learner from scratch on the memory, and then you evaluate it. But the assumption is that we will not use any setup assumption. So even if it's a task incremental setup, we will not use a multi-head training. We will always use the simplest constraint. We will use the simplest assumptions with no other constraints. So even if it's an offline setting, we will not use any offline. We can't use any offline because we can't use samples. We can't.
Yeah.
We don't use.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah, that was perfect. Yeah.
Yeah.
Just one more follow-up question. So, was each of our independent model kind of went through a very rigorous, hyperparameter search to get their optimal thing, or is it dumb enough for the hyperparameter search also?
So yes, so these papers have very varying and very complicated hyperparameter tuning, and that's not really desirable because you don't really want that deployment. So, but for now at this paper, there is no hyperparameter tuning. We literally use the same learning rate. This is the same setting we use for all datasets. So MNIST also goes from 5e2 to 5e minus 4, DK, same. We change no learning rate, we change no hyperparameter. Nothing changes even across datasets. So like MNIST and CIFAR 100 and ImageNet all use the same batch size, all use the same learning rate, schedule, even like since we don't want to have a validation set at all. Since we don't want to have a validation set to avoid all the hyperparameter tuning, we can't have any hyperparameters because then it's like, okay, how do you choose those hyperparameters?
Great. Yeah. Amazing work. Thank you.
I had one question. Can I quickly drop that in?
Yeah, sure.
Can you please explain how do you get that mask that you eventually use to get your outputs?
Yes. So at task incremental settings, you are given a task. You can. Yeah, this is a nice question. Like this was not clear. So you have a two-stage decomposition, right? So you have task IDs and classes within the task. CL1, CL2. Task 1, you have task 2, and you have CL4, CL5, for example. Okay. So what do you get as a mask is that suppose you have a input X which belongs to task 1. Okay. So you know that from your task incremental assumption that your class is going to be class 1 or class 2. Okay. So what do you do is you take the prediction of your model. You will impose a mask which is 1 at class 1 and class 2 and 0 at all other classes. And you take a dot product with, you just multiply it with the prediction. So you get so you get probability of 0.2, 0.1. This will not be a probability vector, but like it'll be, you can take the argmax over it without causing any problems, and 0 over everything else. So when you take the argmax over this, you're taking argmax only over the classes which matter, which are there in this task. That way you can successfully add the task incremental constraint without actually having to train for it. Like, it keeps the approach very clean. Similarly,
So-
the mask, yeah, hello.
Right. So the learner knows about what, like, the different tasks. But then do you also assume that the classes across tasks are disjoint? I mean, what happens if a class is present across tasks?
We currently only evaluate over the existing setups, because the value of GDOM is to compare. This is a probing method. So the value is to compare against existing benchmarks and see, okay, how do existing benchmarks perform against this? But since it's a sanity check, you are right. It should be very scalable across different newer tasks. That's why we propose this very simple decomposition into sampling, learning, and mask. So as you said, that okay, what happens if a task has more classes? So like, so suppose if task 1 has class 1, class 2, class 3. Task 2 also has some overlap. It has class 2, class 3, and like class 4, class 5. At prediction time, here our mask can incorporate these things very naturally. So if you have X, you have class 1, class 2, class 3, you can put 1, 3 ones here and zeros at other places. Similarly, when you get an input from this, you can have like a vector with 1, 1, 1 here to encode this. So like, it's very flexible across more assumptions. So like, for example, when you have contextual settings, you have a task based on the context. Like, the classes and task can overlap, and it should be that way. All we say is that using this mask, you can extend very naturally to these setups. Then the second part that we also say in the paper is that, okay, what happens if you don't have binary masks? Like, your task constraint is coming from a scene. So like, you have a scene of an indoor, you're given that that this image is from an indoor scene. Using that assumption, to incorporate that knowledge in, if that's your task, you can incorporate a prior, not a prior exactly, but like an additional information over your prediction, saying that okay, it's highly likely, it's like there's a 40% probability that there's a chair or a table, but like classes like hyenas or leopards are going to be like very, very small. So you can, instead of having like a binary mask, you can have, instead of having a 0, 1 to power m mask, you can have a continuous mask, which will impose a cost of a classification. So you can still do p into m and still take the maximum and apply it for contextual learning given these contexts. So this way, this simple decomposition that we had, since we hope this is like a sanity check for all more realistic settings which are coming recently in continual learning, we make sure that the mask is very flexible to the settings that you propose and more. Does this sort of answer your question? Sorry if I took too much time.
No, thank you. It does.
Yeah, maybe you can quickly conclude with your presentation so that we can let the other questions at the end of your talk.
Right. So the highlight here is that GDOM model has nothing to reduce forgetting explicitly. It has nothing to improve intransigence. It always does simple learning. That is, it just minimizes a cross entropy with a network trained from scratch. It has no task incremental training. There is no offline training. It never, the sampling is extensible the sampling makes no assumptions like disjoint or anything. Furthermore, in more engineering aspects, it makes no hyperparameter tune. It has no hyperparameter tuning, just to avoid the whole process of, okay, what about hyperparameters? So what do we do? So like this was up till here, I described only what's our method and how do we compare it with existing methods. Like how does it compare, like relation with experience replay. Here we describe, okay, what's the experimental setup? Since our approach is sort of a sanity check to compare other approaches' performance, like to give a baseline of, okay, at least how much performance should be there. We take 10 existing popular setups and use the same model and memory and the metric. We just use the exact same thing which they used, but we use this constant set of hyperparameters for our method, and we train our method and we get our performance. So here are some existing benchmarks. So if we choose this very nice setup in GSS, where they said that, okay, what happens if you blur the boundaries, and what's the performance at the end? So we see that with compared to existing methods, GDAM has around a 10 to 15 accuracy point increase when evaluated at the end. Similarly, compared to like MIR setup, which has this task disjoint assumption in the evaluation protocol, but it has like it tests across like a nice across different memory sizes. It tests a lot of models, and we show that when we add this disjointed assumption, the margin decreases instead of being 10 to 15. It reduces quite a bit because we lose an advantage. We don't assume this, but that's why the margin decreases, but we still beat existing approaches by quite a big margin. Here, as people rightly pointed out, there is the problem that the evaluation can be, the question was that the evaluation can be unfair because these models only have very little time to update. Typically, there was this constraint that, okay, you will only have one sort of a mega update. You will not have multiple mega updates, which was specifically challenged in this paper. The MIR paper correctly states that, okay, why do you have one gradient update? You can have multiple gradient updates, and that's what they do 5 gradient updates and see that the performance increases. But the also as people highlighted, the gradient updates are not just the number of iterations you have are also not are just not the thing you should evaluate on. Time is a better metric perhaps to design further evaluation protocols over, because otherwise you can have like one iteration but like a very expensive QP solved over that one iteration, which takes a lot of time. But oops, yeah, this is another paper, GMAD, which has certain relaxations over the different setup, but it nevertheless evaluates in a similar setting. We similarly we have similar accuracies here. Yeah, here was the question that they have very few updates over the iterations, and GDAM has a lot of updates. So is this comparison unfair? This is a very good question, and it's fair to say. But GDAM trains from scratch, so it's unfair to expect it that in one time step it will learn in one gradient update. It'll go from scratch to state of the art. Of course, that's not what's going to happen. It needs these iterations to train it. But instead, what we can do is, why limit these approaches iterations? We can add more iterations to test instead of just having 5 or 1. So this is an experiment that we did based on the queries which people here rightfully asked. What happens if we increase the iterations of these approaches? Instead of having 5 iterations, what happens if we go to 15, 25, 50, 100. At 100, the training the model and getting the 15 for like training 15 times and getting these numbers took us around 2 to 3 days. So we just quit at that part because otherwise it just gets very expensive. But at this time, up till this, we see that beyond 5, the performance really degrades. So even if you give them the benefit of more iterations and if you relax the time they take to train, if you give them more time to train, still the gap is not really getting reduced. It's a large gap, and this was there. This number was there in the paper. Like this is the largest gap which is still maintained even after giving the benefit of doubt of okay, train for more iterations. People who asked the question. Sorry, I don't remember your names because the screen is not visible. Does this sort of address the query in a good way? Hello, am I connected?
Yes, you are.
Okay, yeah. Does this address the query? But otherwise, the main conclusion is sort of similar. That okay, even if you take disjoint plus online set assumption, then we no longer have a very advantage over different methods, but we still outperform them without using these assumptions. We get close to like very good performance, and we beat all competitors. And this also motivates the part where we said that the formulations itself, like minor changes in the formulations, also matter. So there's this nice curious case that we found in our paper, that when you evaluate on the ICAL setup, which has 10 tasks and 10 classes. It has 20 tasks, 5 classes, but like this has the most benchmarks available. Most papers benchmark on this, so we took this. Our method, GDAM, performs much worse than existing methods like BIC or ICAL. But if you switch this to, say, having a pre-trained model with 50 classes and then training continually over 50 tasks with one class per task, then this switches quite a bit. We go from performing worser by around 15-20% to performing better by 10-15%. This sort of motivates the sort of assumption we made, like offline approaches constrain the number of tasks that people iterate over. When we extend it to larger tasks and when we reduce the number of classes you get, that sort of kills, since when you design the models to suit for this, like BIC and all are very simple corrections. While they are simple, the risk there is that they might sort of overfit to the set of assumptions, and that is that you don't have to balance over a long period of time. It'll work for like 5 over the time step of 5 times or maybe 10 times even, but when it goes to 50 or beyond that, this breaks down and the performance drops quite a bit. So we really liked this formulation, this task introduction PODNet, which is like an ECCV submission. It's like a quite nice paper. Oops. So this way we hope that GDAM can be used to like investigate, okay, what's going on in these setups and serve as a baseline. So here we basically serve as a baseline for, okay, what is the minimum performance you want. So like here all approaches are better than minimum performance, so that's good. So these not really continual learning approaches work, but these experience replay approaches seem to work in this setting. But once you make it harder, they again break down, and none of them outperform GDAM again. So this is the sort of kind of direction of study we try to motivate in our paper. Not just that, okay, oh, we are state of the art or anything like that. That's not the point of the paper. The point of the paper is to serve as a sort of accuracy which needs to be beaten so that it gives us a better than random. Like random, obviously, it's easy to beat, but like it's like a sort of a baseline that okay, to do to sort of claim that you can consolidate information over previous time steps and not just the information in the current memory. You need to perform better than GDAM. Oops. Oops. Yes. So overall, the fact that these approaches perform worse doesn't mean the approaches are bad. Of course, the directions are actually really good. They are well motivated. The hyperparameters are very nicely tuned. The papers take care of all of those details, but maybe it's a bad evaluation metric. For example, in online learning, we should not evaluate at the last after everything happens. Should have like a more online evaluation, which might lead to bring out a certain problems in Sejiram. The formulations are very restrictive. For example, the tasks will not be as the disjoint set formulation is probably a very hard constraint, and the approaches like BIC, while being simple, then heavily tailored to that situation. That okay, beyond beyond a limited set of time steps, it doesn't really, it might not work in like longer time steps in like say an online formulation. So it's alarming that GDAM outperforms tailored algorithms on the formulations that are designed for, and we hope that our evaluation over these over 10 over like across a lot of formulations helps papers evaluate be like more robust and not sort of, if it works over all of these, then it probably has a better chance of working over the future ones as well. This basically concludes our paper. So in summary, we provide a general continual learning formulation, propose a new model called new sanity check called GDAM, which is simple but unifies across a lot of formulations. And this helps us to discuss the quirks and assumptions of the formulations. It helps us develop okay where we are, and the very fact that it performs better than experience replay approaches sort of questions the progress. So, okay, are we what is happening here is the sort of the main pitch of the paper. Thank you.
Oh, well, thank you so much, Neya, for your great talk. And let me start by saying, at least from my side, that I really enjoyed your formulation of continual learning, which is more general, and it's going towards this idea of relaxing a lot of assumptions that have been made over the last few years in continual learning. So that's totally enjoyable, at least from my side. And I also enjoy the whole idea of having more baselines, or as you say, sanity checks, to somehow assess the improvements that we made in continual learning. And one thing that I would totally use your method as an additional baseline, apart from the fine tuning or naive approach and an offline or cumulative upper bound, where we at every time step we try to retrain everything from scratch with the same model. So the more baselines, I think, the better it is. But at the same time, I was surprised not to see, let's say, the computational axis in the evaluation of those methods, as well as of the GDAM, right? Because I think that we should try to somehow assess all these strategies with 3 different axes. So the accuracy, the memory, but also the computation. And so for what I understood, your method essentially is working with just one evaluation at the end, like many other methods as well, right? That you
yeah.
So but is just to conclude, if we evaluate at every time step, that is an assumption that even though many don't do, for example, for PodNet, I'm sure they I mean, the idea was that you could evaluate your system after each time step. Every of the total 50 tasks, they were working towards that assumption of being able to operate after every task. And then, so if you use GDOM, in that case, it quickly loosens somehow its power, because on the computational aspects, I was surprised to see it works better than that their algorithm, the .NET algorithm.
There are so just to address that question. So like we use the exact same evaluation protocol as methods use. So suppose if any method also tests the amount of time that took to from like the start to the evaluation part, we also test it, and we do much better in the computational cost.
Of course.
Because since they also they take the computational cost from start to the time step. That way our method is very fast, because it just samples all the way up till the time step and then just tests on one. That way computationally we are much better than approaches. But of course, if you test every time step and you use it, then problems will come. Second part, PODNet is not an online learning setup. PODNet is more like an offline setup where all samples of a task are provided, and you can learn multiple iterations over it. So PODNet we beat every way in terms of we have much lesser computational time than them. We also have like better. We don't really have better accuracy. We only have like comparable accuracy, I would say. But there is a difference to be made between offline setup and online setup. Online setup is more like MIR from Lucas, Massimo, and all. There, they train to capture the difference. Online has like 10 samples at each time step, whereas offline, say PODNet, has 6,000 time steps. So like 6,000 samples. So for example, CIFAR will be divided into 10 time steps in an offline setup versus 5,000 time steps in an online setup. That's the key difference. Offline, we are also much better computationally as well. Like there is no drawback there.
Yeah.
In GDOM.
Because do we have any more questions for me?
I have a quick question. So all the numbers in the tables, except for the appendix, are with CutMix, right? Like CutMix is activated for GDOM.
Yes. So while GDOM, what happened is that since we only have very few samples to learn from scratch on, we can't use the online samples. We can't use past memory. So we need a very strong regularizer to just make sure that okay, everything's fine. Because the number of samples used to learn is very small, and you have to learn from scratch. Hence, we use CutMix. But we also show an ablation in the appendix on okay, what happens if you don't use CutMix. So if you don't use CutMix, like the accuracy drops by like 1.5%. But typically, since GDOM outperforms others by like 5-10% in online settings, and like even if it drops by 1.5%, it at least performs comparable with state of the art in every other setting. It's still like, I mean, it's not very great to perform comparable with a sanity check, right? Like a sanity check doesn't really alleviate any catastrophic forgetting at all. It should always be better. So like that's why like us claiming state of the art has really no. I mean, we don't really want to focus on that part. Like that's not the focus. But yeah.
Yeah. Of course, it's just to understand the results.
Yes.
So yeah, the question was all the tables in the main paper, not in the appendix. They are all with
yes, CutMix.
Okay. And just out of curiosity, have you tried experience replay with CutMix?
We just train on memory with CutMix. It's just have samples in memory.
Yeah, just experience replay, like straight experience replay, like pure experience replay, but using CutMix between the reservoir and the incoming examples.
We don't we don't code up any other methods. We take the numbers directly from papers because
Okay.
we are testing over 10 formulations. So like this
course.
is like a lot of papers. So like we just train GDM on it and compare. We don't tamper with the code of anyone else here.
Okay, so it might be that experience replay outperforms GDump if you use CutMix. It might be. I mean,
in that case, you can compare the numbers without CutMix, right? As an appendix. They're also the same numbers for the tables, but without CutMix. That's the CutMix ablation.
yeah.
And still, you can see that in online, we still outperform by large margins. In offline, we perform comparable instead of outperforming them by 1-2%. But then the 1-2% is really not what we're looking for. So like,
sorry to interrupt, but I guess the point that Enrico made makes sense. So yeah, if you use CutMix with experience replay, you might see gains, and that's a very good point, I guess.
Yeah. It was not to discredit the experimental section of the paper.
Yeah, I get that. So I guess that's a really good point. The point of the paper, like, we didn't actually change any model whatsoever. We just took all the existing state of the art. We just took their own benchmarks. We didn't even propose any benchmark, and we simply said, okay, let's do something which is super simple but can be applied to all other formulations. That's it, with no hyperparameter. And I would actually like to make one small point regarding the online setup. So I guess the major problem is not here online versus offline. The major problem is we as a community don't agree with the problem formulation yet. Online with respect to what? Is it the online with respect to sample? Is it online with respect to learning a class? Is it online with respect to learning a task? If it is online with respect to samples, then evaluate after every batch update. If it is online with respect to learning a label, then evaluate after every label update. And if it is online with respect to task, then evaluate after every online update of task. So we talk about batch update as online, but we evaluate after task. And that is what we are trying to say. Like, if you're in theory, if you're calling yourself online, then propose an evaluation that actually captures it. Yeah.
Yeah, one more question. I mean, I guess you mentioned there is a multi-head testing. What is the mask that you provide during testing?
The mask is the 0-1 mask formed from the task incremental setup. So like, suppose if you're given that this sample is from task 1, so you know that it's either class 2 or class 3. So you can actually mask the other softmax probabilities and only get these two softmax and then take argmax over these two. Instead of taking
this is for more of a task incremental, but not for a class incremental, like where I don't, because all of them have the same task and I can't, at the test time, actually, I can't differentiate between different tasks. So, I mean, that case is not here covered, right? I mean,
yeah, in that case, our mask is all one.
Okay.
Like we don't actually.
But do you test it for it, or like?
We test across all setup, across our diverse variety of setups. There's class incremental, there's task incremental, there's online, there is offline, there is disjoint, there is not disjoint.
Okay, I haven't read the paper, so yeah, okay.
No problem. Like I mean, I think it's important to when proposing an approach, it's like good to see if it's approach is a continuous learning approach, it should sort of work across these all formulations, and not just on tune to one. So like, yeah.
Okay, yeah, makes sense. Yes.
Amaya, awesome presentation. I just have a very basic question. So the difference between normal learning and container learning in the first place is container learning, you present things in sequence, right? So in a way, you're just trying to, like, one of the aspects that you're trying to mitigate is catastrophic forgetting. But in GDUM, you have some samples from previous class, right? While you train the model from scratch. So in that case, there is no catastrophic forgetting at all. So naturally, that should perform better than anything else, right? So is the bar not set high by default?
Can you explain why there is no catastrophic? I didn't.
Okay,
so elaborate on the question.
Yeah. Sorry. So for example, like I'm not representing all the methods. let's say a random continuous learning method, you have first class, and then you train, like use the second class of data. You don't have access to the first class, so it's natural that you'll start forgetting the first class. So are you
Yes.
clear? Are you with me right now? Okay, fine. So so all these methods try to mitigate this forgetting of old classes. Okay.
Yes.
So in your method, even though you train a model from scratch and you have very less samples, you have samples from all those tasks in that segment, right? So for
Yes.
I guess I got the question. Sorry, I'm interrupting. I'm just trying
yeah.
to answer. So we don't compare with any approach that is not using memory.
Okay, no, I'm not saying. I'm just saying that like, is the bar not set too high?
So,
Because
so if you think about it, let's say that you have a limited budget to take a sample from the previous task. Let's say your
okay,
current task has got 10,000 samples, and I'm allowing you to only have, like, say 100 samples from the previous task, just as
okay,
an abstract representation of the previous class. And that
okay,
is the
okay,
only thing that you can actually use to remember. So if you don't have any sample from the previous task, definitely there is going to be huge catastrophe forgetting, and people just use some other sort of regularization. You can keep previous weights, try to update your parameters such that they don't deviate much, but that is also in some sense keeping some memory blocked. So then you could have some samples from the previous task as a
Mhm.
replay. So we only compare with those methods where there is memory. And
Okay,
since the samples
okay.
are
I
very
think
limited in number, so it's not like you can completely avoid catastrophic forgetting. And yeah, yeah, that's fine.
Okay,
if I may just, I think I got an answer to your question. Sorry, I'm not one of the authors actually, but I think they're actually not raising the bar, they're actually lowering the bar. Because if you imagine you train on task one and you have certain weights that are basically already initialized towards the first task solution, and now you have a core set of exemplars that you can rehearse on, you would expect catastrophic forgetting, but you would expect much less drift from the previous task solution than you would get if you just retrain from scratch. Because so in
Yes.
the
Exactly.
worst case scenario, like their thing is actually the worst case scenario, because this is
Yes.
full catastrophic forgetting. You forget everything except for those exemplars. Whereas if you keep fine tuning on your core set, you would actually expect something still to be retained. So this is like the absolute worst case.
Yeah.
Okay, no. My point was that, like, I understand what you said. My point was that I didn't say that they set the bar too high. Like, they didn't restrict anything. I'm saying that the accuracy that you get out of this burst modeling will be higher. Naturally, is what I'm saying, because it's more equivalent to a normal training than a continual training.
Yeah, but
Uh,
what I'm saying is it will be lower actually.
Oh,
yeah. It should be lower, but then the lower bar is itself much
Yeah.
higher than the current approaches,
okay,
which is
okay.
worrying. Which is the
Mhm.
worrying part, like which is like the questioning progress part.
Okay, got it. Thank you.
Yeah.
Can I also ask one question?
Sure.
So I agree with all of what you said and all the exemplar comparisons, and it's quite surprising actually to see that random sampling is still outperforming sampling methods that are very tailored towards retaining something for continual learning. On the other hand, you were showing a table where you were comparing to regularization methods like EWC, and it's pretty clear from previous papers that, for example, there was a paper on Dirichlet processes for core sets, where they said that on MNIST, for example, it doesn't matter how you sample, random sampling is good enough. If you just get like 200 to 500 samples from MNIST, they're basically the best approximation of the data set you can get. So one of the questions is, for in general, if you want to like compare exemplar rehearsal now and say that GDUM is a baseline, and you move towards a new data set now that's not one of these benchmarks where people have done excessive experimentation on what is a good size of K, how would you choose basically how to evaluate GDUM? Because you would have to first figure out how much K do you need in order to get something appropriate. And you could always obviously scale K such that it outperforms any regularization methods by just storing enough data.
So here, GDUM is not a like a new CL method, right? So suppose if you develop a new continual learning method, your method requires you to store a core set of say size 400. Then you train GDUM with a core set of size 400 and compare the performance. not, I mean, like, GDUM is not a continual learning method by, I mean, like, not a good continual learning method by itself. It's just used to compare what is the thing you add by doing experience replay. What is the what by having the previous network weights, by having something from the previous memory, what in extra do you add over the current memory is what
So
it
I
tries to.
understand. So memory in your definition is the amount of exemplars you store, because I saw some
Yes.
methods in your list that literally do not store exemplars. Like there was generative replay methods, there was regularization methods.
Yes, in those setups, what they say is that they will have equal amount of MB for storage, and they try to sort of so like suppose if I have a generator model, you'll be like, okay, the generator model size should be similar to the amount of MB you use when you store exemplars,
Okay, I see.
and
Because
hence they
otherwise
say
you
that
can
it's
just store
fair.
everything.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
Yeah, thank you.
That's
That makes
how
sense.
they. Yeah,
That
but
makes a lot of
that's
sense.
that's how the setups compared. Like we don't change any setup assumption.
Cool.
But was the core set part clear that we will not find core sets using GDUM? It's just that when you obtain a core set size using other approaches, you can compare it with GDUM with the same core set and see. Yeah.
Yeah, of course. You use it as an additional sanity check, as you were saying before. Yeah. Just let's make sure to use it with a more frequent evaluation just at the end, and evaluate also the computation for all those methods. And I guess it will be great to use it as well. I will try to use it in my papers.
Code is
So, yeah.
He has actually written pretty nice code. It's super simple, no regularization,
Yeah.
no hyperparameters, you can just train it.
Exactly. So do we have any more questions?
Can I have one final question?
Go ahead, Joseph.
Yeah. So so this would be kind of a baseline for continual learning methods. So my question would be like, can there be a continual GDUM? Because like over here, what we have is a single model from scratch is kind of trained at each point once we have seen data for that specific task and so on and so forth. So did you kind of have any kind of clue onto how can you come up with a GDUM where you initially start off with a model and then you, just as any of the continual learning methods, it is supposed to grow by itself. So I mean, did you get my question or?
That's a great question. And like we intentionally train from scratch. Yes, we don't need to. The intentional training from scratch is to avoid any influence of previous time steps. So, this is an obvious extension that you can use previous models, but that will then, it's like while evaluation, since it's a sanity check, you don't really know what is causing the performance to what is the performance attributable to. In this sanity check case, you know that the performance is entirely attributable to your current memory. I mean, if you sort of see, if you incorporate, if you have a continuous GDUM, it's basically experience replay. That's what a continuous GDUM is basically.
Right. Yeah. But then, like, I was more concerned on the kind of the network itself. For example, like if we are doing something like class incremental, then definitely when we have, let's say we have 5 classes now and we are adding 5 more classes next, and then there would be network changes that might be involved. So I mean, maybe the earlier knowledge that we have acquired, it might positively or negatively affect us. So instead of just each time we have, as we are using a fresh uninitialized, or rather fresh initialization, that might help GDUM on a positive way rather than kind of harming it.
Yes, like that's what we expect, that you cannot possibly, you should not possibly go below the performance of this, because I mean, of course, like the accuracy should always be higher than this. That's the critical claim, right? Like, okay, if you add over multiple times, etc., the accuracy should have improved beyond this. Why are all the accuracies below this?
Yeah, sure. I mean, yeah. Maybe we can continue this discussion offline. Like, I'm Joseph from Vinit's team in IIT Hyderabad, so we can. Sure. Thank you so much, man. Yeah.
Okay, I guess so we can close the reading group session here after more than 1.5 hours. So thank you so much, Ameya, for your time and effort in developing this paper with your co-authors as well. And I hope to see you again in the next reading group session.
Thanks for inviting me. Like this has been like this is like the core. These are all continual learning people. Meeting each other. So it's been like very nice to present it, and like this has been a great discussion. It allowed me to clarify like a bunch of points about our paper to like interested audience, and like it'll help people quickly grasp the paper in some sense, I hope.
Totally agree. So thank you all for joining, and of course, if you want to follow the next reading group sessions, we have it every Friday at this time. So see you soon. Bye.
Bye bye.